Her family kept saying, "We miss your ex. He was so much better for our daughter." I smiled and said, "I understand." Then I ended the relationship and sent her back to her perfect ex. Their desperate calls started when he refused to take her back. I'll never forget that moment. It's been months since the divorce was finalized, but the sting of it still lingers, like an unwanted scar. The worst part. It wasn't just about losing her. It was the realization that I had been a placeholder in a story she wanted to tell, an accessory in her life to make her seem more interesting. Not a husband. Not a partner. Just a gay roommate to entertain her coworkers. I wasn't a real person to her anymore. I had married Sariah when I was 35, and she was 32. We had been the ideal middle-class couple. I had a decent job managing logistics at a manufacturing company. She worked in corporate sales at a big firm downtown. We lived in a house we could barely afford, in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Nothing extraordinary, but solid. A life most people would envy. I paid the mortgage, property taxes, and homeowners insurance. She paid for groceries and her car payment. Fair enough, or so I thought at the time. But something changed around 6 months after the wedding. It wasn't obvious at first. Just small, strange things. Sariah would slip off her wedding ring when she went to work, sometimes forgetting to put it back on. I noticed it only a few times at first, but then it started happening more often. At first, I thought maybe she was just too busy. People forget things, right? But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. One night, I came home earlier than usual. The house was quiet. I walked in through the front door and found her getting ready for a client dinner. Her ring was sitting on the bathroom counter, next to her lipstick. It was just another accessory she decided not to wear. I stood there, staring at it. She hadn't even bothered to put it back on after getting ready. I wasn't mad. I was just confused. "Why do you keep doing that?" I asked. She paused for a moment, looked at the ring, then back at me. There was no guilt in her eyes. No understanding of why I might feel hurt. "I didn't realize I was doing it that much," she said, slipping the ring back onto her finger. Then she kissed me, told me she loved me, and I let it go. Or at least, I thought I did. I told myself I was being insecure, controlling even. But in the back of my mind, the doubt started to settle in. A few weeks later, we attended her company's annual client event. Sariah had spent hours getting ready for this one. Hair, makeup, 3 different dresses, trying to make herself look perfect. She said it was important for her career. I wasn't thrilled about attending. It wasn't my crowd. But I went because I was her husband, and that's what husbands do. Right? They support their wives, even when they're standing in a ballroom full of strangers who all have their own agendas. The venue was a fancy hotel downtown with a ballroom full of glimmering chandeliers. The type of place where people wear suits they can't afford, drinking overpriced wine, and pretending to be happy. Sariah disappeared into the crowd within minutes, greeting clients and colleagues with the same practiced smile she'd perfected over the years. I grabbed a drink from the refreshment table and posted up near the food, scrolling through my phone to pass the time. That's when I met Breyer. She was in her late 30s, a woman from the marketing department. She had a friendly smile. And a way of speaking that made you feel like she was your friend. Even if she'd only just met you. She came up to me, introduced herself, and after a few minutes of small talk, she dropped the bombshell. "So, I just have to ask," she said with a grin. "And I hope this doesn't sound weird, but would you maybe want to grab coffee sometime? I'm always looking for a shopping buddy. Someone like you, if you know what I mean." I stared at her, confused. She smiled wider, completely oblivious to my reaction. "Sariah mentioned you two have kind of a Lavender marriage thing going on," she said casually. "That you're basically roommates. I think that's so progressive." My stomach dropped. I hadn't heard that term in years. Sariah had been telling people we were roommates. That our marriage was just an arrangement. Not a marriage at all. Brer's words hit me harder than anything else had. "Yeah," she continued. "I think it's so cool. Like a month ago, at an after-work gathering, she was telling everyone how perfect you two are together. But live totally separate lives. Super modern. Right?" I could feel my face turning pale. My voice was steady as I excused myself, walking away from her without another word. I scanned the room for Sariah, finally spotting her across the ballroom, talking to a man in an expensive suit. The way he leaned into her, laughing too loud, leaning just a little too close, made me feel like I was watching a scene I wasn't meant to be part of. She wasn't wearing her ring. I walked straight to her, my steps calm but deliberate. She looked up, a smile forming as she saw me approach. "Hey babe. This is Dax," she said, introducing me to the man. I interrupted her, making sure my voice carried across the room. "Just so you know, we're actually married. With vows and everything. Not roommates." Dax stepped back like I just slapped him. Sariah froze. I turned to her. My voice even colder now. "Funny thing happened. Your coworker already filled me in on our living arrangement. Apparently. You've been telling people we're roommates for about a month now." Her eyes widened in shock. "What?" she started. But I cut her off. "We're done," I said, my tone as flat as it could be. "You wanted to pretend you were single. You are now. I'll talk to a lawyer on Monday." I turned and walked away without looking back. Not a single glance. Sariah wasn't calling after me. She wasn't apologizing. Instead, I heard her talking to her coworkers, telling them how much of a misunderstanding it all was. I walked out of that ballroom with a sense of finality. I wasn't coming back. I spent the rest of the evening in a daze. The weight of what had just happened pressing down on me. I walked out of that ballroom like I was just another person attending a business meeting. No emotional attachment. No lingering doubts. I told myself it was over. And that's exactly how I treated it. But it wasn't that simple. The days that followed were a blur. The divorce papers were delivered the next morning. Just as I'd promised. The lawyer's office called to confirm the papers had been served, and I had to hold myself together as I signed the documents. I wasn't looking for revenge, not really. I didn't want to hurt her. But I wasn't going to stand by and let her destroy our marriage and make a joke of it in front of everyone. Either. Sariah texted me that afternoon, asking where I had gone. Then came the next one, accusing me of embarrassing her at the party. She didn't even apologize. She was angry. Because I called her out in front of her colleagues. It was all about her image. I could see it. Like a mask she wore to cover up everything else. There was nothing genuine behind her words. I ignored the texts. I didn't need to explain myself to her. Later that night, I heard her pull into the driveway. Her car door slammed shut. And I heard the clicking of her heels. As she entered the house, she walked into the kitchen, her purse swinging from her shoulder. She set it down on the table, and stood there, looking at me. "Aren't you going to explain what happened?" she asked, her voice sharp. But beneath it, I could hear the strain. She was trying to keep it together, but she knew what had happened. I didn't look up from my tea. "Nothing to explain," I said, my voice calm, almost detached. "You told your coworkers our marriage was fake." I corrected the record. "That's it." She kicked off her heels, the frustration in her face growing. "It was a joke," she said. But the words didn't sound convincing. "You're overreacting." "Huh. You've been telling people we're roommates," I said, crossing my arms. "A financial arrangement, a fake marriage. How's that a joke?" "It's just something I said to make myself seem interesting at work." She snapped, her face flushing. "Everyone lies about their personal lives. What's the big deal?" "The big deal," I said slowly, "is that you lied about us to the people you work with. You lied about our entire marriage. And now, I'm done." She opened her mouth to protest, but I didn't let her. "I'll talk to a lawyer Monday," I said, the words final, leaving no room for argument. She stood there for a moment, her expression flickering between disbelief and anger. "You're really going to do this? Over something so small?" "It's not small, Sariah," I said, finally meeting her gaze. "You didn't just lie. You made me the punchline of your story. I'm not going to stand for that." I turned and walked out of the kitchen, heading for the living room. Behind me, I heard her voice rise in desperation. "Don't do this. We can work it out." But I didn't stop. I walked out the door and didn't look back. The next few days were surreal. I was still processing everything, still reeling from the shock of it all. And yet, something inside me started to shift. There was a quiet strength growing, a sense of clarity. I was tired of being the person who let things slide. Tired of being the person who didn't speak up. By the time Monday rolled around, I was ready. I walked into the lawyer's office with a calm that surprised me. We went over everything. The house, the assets, the bank accounts. Sariah had no claim to anything. I had paid for everything, from the mortgage to the utilities, while she had done little more than contribute to the grocery bills. It was all in my name. I had everything in order. I left the lawyer's office feeling a strange sense of peace. I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I was just done. It was the only word that made sense. Done with the lies. Done with the games. Done with pretending that our marriage was something it wasn't. That night Sariah texted me again. "Where are you? You can't just leave me hanging like this." I blocked her number, and went to bed. The weight of the past few days finally lifted, and for the first time in a long while, I slept soundly. The next few days, she kept trying to reach me. Texts, calls, even emails. She wanted answers. But I had nothing left to give her. I didn't owe her anything anymore. The silence between us grew. Then, on Friday, I went to work, like any other day. I felt light, almost free. That afternoon, I received an email from the lawyer. The divorce papers were ready to be signed. I was moving forward. Sariah's texts slowed down after that. She must have known. But there was one last thing she did. She showed up at the house that evening. No warning. No announcement. Just knocked on the door looking like a woman who had lost everything. I didn't open the door at first. I just stood on the other side, listening to her soft knocks. Then, when I finally did open it, she stood there, her eyes puffy and red. She was holding a bag. Something to make it seem like she had some kind of plan, some kind of reconciliation in mind. "I made a mistake," she said, her voice shaking. "I know I messed up. I shouldn't have said those things. I was trying to make myself look interesting. But it wasn't worth it. I can't believe you're doing this. You should have thought about that before you lied about our marriage," I said coldly. "Before you made me the joke." She took a step back, looking defeated. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I didn't realize what I had until I lost it. I stared at her for a moment, then stepped aside. "Goodbye, Sariah." And just like that, she was gone. The door closed behind her with a finality I hadn't known I needed. It wasn't anger I felt. It wasn't sadness. It was relief. The beginning of something new. Something better. I went upstairs, sat on the bed, and looked around the room that had once been ours. It didn't feel like a prison anymore. It felt like freedom. The following week was one of those times when everything seemed to slow down. I went through the motions of my daily routine, but there was a strange sense of detachment. I didn't want to feel numb. But it was hard to ignore how empty everything seemed. After what had happened, the world outside my house seemed to continue, as if nothing had changed. But in my world, everything had shifted. By the time Monday came around, I was ready. I had spent the weekend planning, making sure everything was in order. I had already contacted the lawyer, and I was prepared for the divorce proceedings to begin. I was no longer questioning my decision, no longer wondering if I was making a mistake. I was sure. The doubt had faded, replaced by a clarity I hadn't known I needed until now. I walked into the lawyer's office that morning with a sense of finality. This wasn't about getting back at Sariah. It was about protecting myself, moving on, and finding a way forward. The lawyer handed me the papers to sign, and I didn't hesitate. I didn't flinch when the weight of everything hit me. In that moment, this was the next step. "Everything is in order," the lawyer said, looking at me with a neutral expression. "The house, assets, the bank accounts, all of it's yours. She has no claim. The division should be straightforward." I nodded, feeling strangely calm. The house had always been mine. Every payment, every bill. It was all in my name. I had always carried the burden. It was fitting that the house would stay with me now. In the aftermath of it all, Sariah tried calling later that day. Her name flashed on my phone screen, and I stared at it for a moment before deciding to ignore it. Then came the text. The first of many that would follow. "Why are you doing this?" she wrote. "You're making a huge mistake. I never meant for it to go this far." I didn't reply. I didn't feel the need to. I had already answered her in every way possible. There was nothing more to say. That evening, Sariah showed up at the house again. Her car parked outside, Lights off. I had no idea she was coming. The knock on the door came so suddenly, it made me jump. I stood there for a moment, my pulse quickening, before finally opening it. There she was, standing in front of me, looking almost the same as when I had seen her a few days ago. Her face a mixture of exhaustion and something else. It wasn't regret, but more like a desperate plea. "I need to talk to you," she said, her voice shaky. I didn't say anything at first. I just stepped aside, letting her in. I had no intention of hearing what she had to say. But I knew she wouldn't leave without trying. "You don't have to do this," she continued as she entered, looking around the house like it was a place she no longer recognized. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you." "You've said that already," I replied, my voice steady. "But the truth is, Sariah, you didn't just hurt me. You humiliated me. You made our marriage a joke. To your coworkers. To your friends." She shook her head, as if trying to deny it. But she couldn't. "I didn't mean it that way. You wanted to seem interesting." I interrupted. "You wanted to be different. So you lied. And now, you're standing here, acting like you can fix it. You can't." She stared at me for a long time, her eyes welling up with tears. But there was no apology in them. No real remorse. "I didn't know what I had until it was gone," she whispered. I looked at her, feeling a mixture of pity and anger. "It's too late for that," I said. "You made your choice. You pushed me away long before I ever made the decision to leave." Her face contorted, the facade of control slipping. "You're being cold. You're acting like this doesn't matter." I'm not being cold," I said, my voice low. "I'm just being honest. You didn't respect me. You didn't respect our marriage. And that's why it's over." She stepped back, almost stumbling, as though she hadn't expected me to be this firm, this resolute. "I can't believe you're doing this," she said softly, shaking her head. "You're really just going to walk away from all of it? From everything we had?" "Everything we had was based on lies," I replied. "You've made it clear that what we had didn't matter to you. I'm done pretending it did." The silence between us hung in the air like a heavy weight. I could see her struggling, trying to find the right words, but nothing came. Finally, she nodded. "I guess this is really happening, huh?" "It already happened," I said. "You just don't want to face it." She stood there for another moment, her eyes searching mine, but I didn't waver. Finally, she sighed, turned, and walked out the door. It was over. I watched her drive away, the headlights disappearing down the street. And something inside me shifted. It wasn't anger or resentment anymore. It was simply a quiet understanding. I had done the right thing. That night, I sat alone in the quiet of the house. The silence was no longer oppressive. It felt like a blank page. A chance to start again. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace. I had no idea what would come next, but I was ready. Ready to face whatever was ahead. Alone, but stronger than I had ever been. I didn't hear from Sariah for a few days after that night. No texts. No calls. At first, I was relieved. I could finally breathe. Not having to deal with the constant barrage of excuses, or manipulations. But then, the silence started to feel strange. It was as if the world was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. By Wednesday, I had settled into a routine. Work was still the same, but I found myself going through the motions a bit more mindfully. I no longer had to worry about Sariah's random outbursts or late night texts. I could leave the house without worrying about what she'd say or do when I came home. It was the first real peace I'd felt in a long time. Then, on Thursday morning, I got the first real sign that things were moving forward. The lawyer's office called to let me know that Sariah had been served. The divorce papers were now in her hands. And from the sounds of it, she wasn't happy. The lawyer didn't go into detail, but I could hear the strain in his voice. He was just confirming that everything was set for the next steps, and that Sariah would likely contest a few things. I didn't care. At this point, it wasn't about the money or the house. It was about cutting ties, putting an end to the charade. By the time Monday rolled around, I was fully prepared to move on. I'd already begun drafting out the next chapter of my life. I started to look into new hobbies, things I had put off doing for years. I didn't feel the need to rush into anything, but it was a relief knowing I could do whatever I wanted without having to answer to anyone. That afternoon, I was sitting at my desk when my phone rang. It was Sariah. I let it go to voicemail. Her voice popped up a few minutes later, trying to sound casual, but I could tell it wasn't. Brad. I don't know what to say. I know I messed up, but this divorce, this isn't the way. We can fix things. We can talk, right? I didn't listen to the rest. I'd heard it all before. The manipulation. The attempt to make me feel guilty for something she'd started. I deleted the voicemail and went back to my work. It wasn't worth the energy to even consider it. Sariah kept texting throughout the day, but I ignored it. I didn't need closure from her. I didn't need her to validate my feelings. I had spent enough years chasing that from her, and it never came. It wasn't coming now. I had to be my own closure. Later that evening, as I was making dinner, there was a knock on the door. I had just set the steaks on the grill and the potatoes in the oven when I heard it. I stood up and walked to the door, unsure of who it could be. When I opened it, there she was. Sariah, standing there with her arms crossed, her eyes rimmed with red. She didn't look like the woman I had married. She looked like someone who had just realized how much she had lost. "Can we talk?" she asked quietly, looking down at her shoes. "Please. I need to apologize." I stared at her for a moment. She had come here. After all the things she said. After everything that happened. She had the audacity to ask for forgiveness. To think that a few words would erase everything she had done. I didn't say anything at first. I just stepped aside and let her in. I didn't want to hear her excuses. But I knew she wouldn't leave without trying to explain herself. "You don't have to do this," she said, standing awkwardly in the middle of the living room. "I'm sorry. I never meant to hurt you. You don't get it." I cut in, my voice calm but firm. "You didn't just hurt me, Sariah. You made our whole life a joke. You told people our marriage was fake. You told them I was your gay roommate. Your financial backup. How am I supposed to come back from that?" Her face flushed with embarrassment, but she didn't look sorry. "I didn't think it would go this far," she whispered. "It was just something I said. I didn't mean for it to hurt you." "Eh? But you did," I replied, my voice still steady. You humiliated me. And now you're standing here asking for what? An apology. You don't get to come back from this. You made your choice. And now I'm making mine. I turned away from her, walking back toward the kitchen. I didn't want to hear any more of her excuses. She had already had her chance to apologize. And she blew it. I don't even know what to say to that, she muttered, her voice cracking. I looked at her over my shoulder. There's nothing to say. You made it clear that this wasn't a real marriage. And now, I'm making it clear that I'm done. I could see the tears in her eyes, but I didn't feel anything. No pity. No anger. Just a sense of finality. She stood there for a moment, her chest heaving, as if she was still trying to process what had just happened. But I didn't need her to process anything. I had already made my decision. I guess this is it, then, she said quietly. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. She had already made her choice, and I had made mine. With one last look at me, she turned and walked out the door. I watched her leave, the weight of her presence lifting from my chest. It was over. No more excuses, no more lies. I closed the door behind her. And for the first time, in years, I felt like I could finally breathe. It wasn't long after Sariah left that the reality of it all began to settle in. The silence in the house was no longer oppressive. It was peaceful. It was the kind of quiet I hadn't known I was craving. I found myself slowly embracing the stillness, relishing the freedom that came with it. For the first time in years, I wasn't walking on eggshells, waiting for her to make some comment, or give me some half-hearted apology for things she didn't fully understand. The weight of her absence was heavy, but in a way that felt right. The first few days after she left were a blur. I didn't focus too much on the details of the divorce. That would come in time. Instead, I spent my time settling into a new routine. One where I didn't have to constantly worry about Sariah's moods or pretend that everything was okay, when it clearly wasn't. The house felt like it was finally mine again. Not a place where I was living with someone who didn't respect me or our marriage. A few days later, I got a text from her. "Oh, we need to talk." It was brief, almost matter of fact, like she was still trying to pull the strings from afar. I debated for a moment, wondering whether or not to respond. But I quickly realized that there was no real conversation left between us. I had already made my decision. I was done. Then came the phone call. "Brad, this isn't right. We can't end things like this," she said, her voice shaky. "We've been through too much. You can't just walk away from everything we had." I didn't even hesitate. "We didn't have anything, Sariah," I said, my voice calm but firm. "You made sure of that. You pushed me away long before I ever made the decision to leave. I'm done." There was silence on the other end of the line, followed by a soft sigh. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I don't know what happened," she murmured. "But I'm asking you to think about it. We can fix this." "Though, I've already thought about it," I replied. "And I'm not fixing anything. I'm moving on." The line went quiet again. For a moment, I thought she might say something more, something to sway me, but she didn't. She knew. We both knew there was nothing left to say. She had crossed a line, and I was no longer willing to follow her down that path. The divorce papers came through a few days later, and I didn't even flinch. They were just pieces of paper. Symbols of a relationship that had ended long before the final signature. I signed them, without hesitation. And the process began. I had no illusions about what was coming next. I was no longer worried about what Sariah might do, how she might react. She had already shown me who she was. And I had seen enough. That evening, I sat on the couch, flipping through channels. But none of it really registered. The TV was just background noise. A distraction I didn't need. I didn't feel angry. Nor did I feel relief. There was no sense of victory. I had just moved past it. The way you move past something that doesn't matter anymore. There was nothing left in our marriage worth fighting for. And that realization, though painful, was freeing. The following week was one of transition. I moved around the house, cleaning out drawers, sorting through old memories. It wasn't about the physical space, though it was nice to have it to myself again. It was about letting go of the emotional clutter. I threw away old photos, trinkets we had bought together, things that used to have meaning, but now felt hollow. With each item I discarded, it felt like I was clearing out a little more of the past. A little more of her. I knew I needed to focus on myself now. I couldn't keep holding on to the idea of what could have been. I had given it my all, and it hadn't been enough. I couldn't keep pretending it was. Then came the call from my lawyer. "We're making good progress," he said. Sariah's attorney is starting to negotiate the settlement. But there shouldn't be any major issues. I didn't really care about the details. All I cared about was the future, moving forward. The house would stay mine. And the assets would be divided. That was the extent of it. There was nothing left between us. Except the formalities. Sariah was already trying to move on too. But it felt like too little. Too late. A few days after that, I found myself sitting at a coffee shop, mindlessly scrolling through my phone. A woman approached the table, and stood there, her shadow falling across the screen. I looked up and was surprised to see Jessica. She had been a friend for a long time. Someone I'd met years ago through mutual friends. But we'd never really connected on a deeper level. Until recently. "Hey," she said, her smile warm but guarded. "How are you holding up?" I shrugged, trying to keep it casual. "Better. It's been a rough few weeks, but I'm getting there." "Good to hear," she said, sitting down across from me. "I've been thinking about you. I know this whole thing has been hard. But I'm proud of you for standing your ground." "I didn't have much of a choice," I said, trying to keep the conversation light. "You don't really get a choice when the person you thought you knew turns out to be someone else." She nodded, her eyes thoughtful. "You're stronger than you realize, Brad. I know it doesn't feel like it right now. But this is just the beginning. You're going to find your way. And you won't be alone." The comfort in her words was more than I expected. I hadn't realized how much I needed someone to acknowledge the weight I'd been carrying. Jessica wasn't just offering sympathy. She was offering understanding. She knew exactly what I was feeling. And for the first time in a while, I felt seen. We sat and talked for a while. And as the conversation shifted to lighter topics, I realized something. I wasn't done yet. This was just a chapter, and though it had been a painful one, it wasn't the end. I was still writing my story. As I left the coffee shop, the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the pavement. For the first time, I didn't feel the heaviness of what had happened. I felt like I was stepping into something new. It was time to move forward. And this time, it was my decision. The next few weeks felt like a strange blur. Sariah's attempts to contact me had started to taper off. Each call and text growing more desperate and strained. It was almost like she was grasping at straws. Trying to get me to respond, trying to make me feel like I had somehow made the wrong choice. But the more I ignored her, the more I realized how empty those messages had been. She wasn't trying to fix anything. She was trying to regain control. Then, one evening, it happened. I was sitting in the living room, going over some work emails, when my phone buzzed. A message from Sariah. "I'm sorry," it said. "I've had time to think, and I know I messed up. Can we talk?" I stared at the screen, my finger hovering over the keyboard. Part of me wanted to respond. Part of me wanted to tell her how much I'd suffered, how much I had given, and how it had never been enough. But I didn't. I just couldn't. Instead, I called the lawyer. I needed clarity. This wasn't about reconciliation anymore. It was about closing the chapter and starting fresh. The next morning, I walked into the lawyer's office, with the same quiet resolve I'd had since the divorce began. We went over the details again: the house, the division of assets, everything. The lawyer confirmed that Sariah had been contacted and was, predictably, trying to contest parts of the settlement. She hadn't signed yet, but everything was moving forward. "Everything's looking pretty straightforward," he told me. "No surprises. We'll file the paperwork in the next few days." It should have been comforting, the certainty of it. But something about it left me feeling hollow. It was a finality I had been preparing for. But now that it was here, it didn't feel like relief. It just felt empty. As the days passed, the reality of the situation began to sink in. Sariah wasn't coming back. She wasn't going to apologize in the way I wanted her to. She wasn't going to admit the full extent of what she had done. But that was something I had to come to terms with on my own. This wasn't about her anymore. It was about me. I had spent so much time focusing on fixing her that I had neglected to fix myself. It wasn't until the phone call came that I truly understood how much I had moved on. I had just finished dinner when I saw the name flash on my screen. Sariah. I debated for a second, then answered. "Hello." Her voice was softer this time, quieter. "Brad, I know you're probably tired of hearing from me. But I just need you to understand something." I felt a flicker of annoyance stir in me, but I didn't let it show. "You don't need to explain anything, Sariah." "No. You don't get it." She pressed, her tone urgent. "I know I messed up. I know I hurt you, and I'm sorry. I wish I could take everything back." There it was again. The apology that wasn't really an apology. The words she thought would make everything okay again. "I'm done, Sariah," I said, cutting her off before she could continue. "You've said it all before, and it doesn't change anything. I'm not doing this anymore." "I didn't want it to end like this," she said, her voice cracking now. "We had something, Brad. You didn't value it," I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. "You wanted something different, something that wasn't real. And now, this is the consequence." The silence on the other end was thick. I could feel the weight of her realization. But I didn't feel any satisfaction from it. I was tired of being part of her story. Tired of being the person she ran to when things got complicated. "I'll sign the papers," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I wanted you to know I'm sorry. And I wish things had been different. It was over." The words weren't the closure I had been waiting for. But it didn't matter anymore. I didn't need her apology. I needed peace. And for the first time, I had it. I hung up the phone and set it down on the table. It was done. The chapter had closed. And I was ready to turn the page. The next few days passed quickly. The reality of what was happening settling in. Sariah had agreed to the settlement. And the divorce was finalizing. It felt like I had been living in a fog for so long. And now that it was clearing, I could finally breathe again. One night, I sat on the couch, a glass of whiskey in hand, staring out the window at the street below. The house felt different now. Quieter, but in a good way. I wasn't sure where I was going, but I knew I wasn't looking back. Then my phone buzzed again. It was from Jessica. "I've been thinking," it said. "If you ever need someone to talk to, I'm here. You don't have to go through this alone." For the first time in a long time, I smiled. Maybe this was what it felt like to have real support. Someone who cared. Not because they had to, but because they wanted to. And that felt like the beginning of something new. I set the phone down, and took another sip of my drink. It wasn't about moving on from the past. It was about finding the courage to live for myself. To build something real. Something mine. And for the first time in a long time, I felt ready. The weeks after the divorce felt like a blur. A strange mix of relief, and an unsettling quietness. The house, once filled with the noise of arguments and false promises, was now still. It had been a while since I'd felt like this. Unburdened. Free. But there was a part of me that was still hesitant to fully embrace it. The idea of truly moving on, of letting go of everything, was harder than I thought. I kept expecting the weight of what had happened to come crashing down on me. But it never did. I had a routine now. Work. The gym, quiet evenings spent watching documentaries, or reading. I filled my days with things that made me feel like I was starting over. Even if it was just on the smallest scale. I didn't expect much. I wasn't looking for love or excitement. I was just trying to heal. And for the first time in a long while, I wasn't rushing. I wasn't pretending. Then came the call from my lawyer. It wasn't unexpected. But when I saw the number pop up on my phone, my heart still skipped a beat. I answered with a tight chest, knowing the final pieces of the divorce were about to fall into place. "Brad," my lawyer said, his tone calm but with a hint of professionalism that told me things were about to get real. "We've received a response from Sariah's attorney. They've agreed to the settlement." It hit me then. It was really happening. The end. All the things I had hoped for, all the things I had expected, were finally coming to a close. It was a strange feeling, not relief exactly, but a heavy kind of finality. The house would be mine. The assets would be split. And that would be the end of it. There would be no more negotiations, no more false hopes of reconciliation. It was done. I sat down on the couch and let the weight of it settle. My mind went back to the moments I had spent convincing myself this was the right thing. Sariah's absence no longer felt like a wound. It felt like a scar. Something that had healed over time, but was still there, just under the surface. Later that day, I received another text from her. "I don't want this to be the end." It read, "I can't believe you're walking away from everything." I stared at the message for a while, unsure of how to feel. I could almost hear her voice through the text. The same pleading tone she always used when things got tough. The same manipulative tone she had used to try and control me for so long. "I'm not walking away from everything," I replied. "I'm walking away from a lie." It was the last time I would respond to her. And I didn't feel any hesitation when I pressed send. This wasn't about her anymore. It was about me. It was about building a life I could be proud of. A life where I didn't have to question my worth. Or wonder if I was good enough. The next few days were a blur of legal paperwork, final signatures, and cleaning out the rest of the things Sariah had left behind. She had taken most of her belongings when she left. But there were still a few things scattered around the house. Clothes she hadn't bothered to pack. The odd knick-knack she'd bought on impulse. I put them in boxes. The way you would pack up something from a past life. A life that was no longer mine. On the weekend, Jessica called. She had been checking in on me every so often. Her voice a constant reminder that I wasn't alone in this. I was still surprised by how easily we had slipped into the kind of friendship that felt comfortable. She wasn't offering pity or sympathy. She was offering understanding. "How's everything going?" she asked, her voice light but warm. "Good," I said, leaning back against the couch. "Quiet. But I'm getting there." "You're better than you think," she said softly. "I'm proud of you, Brad. Really. I know it's been hard." I didn't say anything at first. I didn't feel the need to. I just let the silence hang for a moment. A silence that wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like the first time I was truly being heard, without any expectations. "I think I'm finally starting to believe it," I said quietly. "I'm starting to believe I'm actually going to be okay." "Of course you are," she replied, her voice firm. "And when you're ready, I'll be here. No pressure." I smiled, a genuine smile I hadn't expected. I didn't know if I was ready to move on or start something new. But hearing her say that, knowing I had someone in my corner, made all the difference. For the first time in a while, I felt like I wasn't alone in this world. The next week was when everything officially finalized. The papers were signed. The house was mine. The money was divided. Sariah had signed the settlement. And just like that, we were legally free from each other. There were no grand moments of victory. No cheers. No celebrations. But there was a sense of peace, a quiet satisfaction. I had been through the worst of it. And I had come out the other side stronger. More confident, and, for the first time in a long time, truly free. It was around this time that I realized something important. The past wasn't just a series of events that had happened to me. It was something I could learn from. Something that shaped who I was becoming. The person I was before Sariah didn't exist anymore. That person had died with the marriage. The new me was someone who knew their worth. Someone who knew what they deserved. And more importantly, Someone who wasn't afraid to stand up for themselves. I didn't have it all figured out. I wasn't completely healed. And I didn't have all the answers. But I knew this much, but I was no longer afraid of the unknown. I was no longer afraid of being alone. For the first time, I was ready to start living life on my terms. And that was enough. It had been 6 months since the divorce was finalized. I was in a different place now, both physically and emotionally. The house, the one that had been a symbol of everything I had lost, was now a place where I felt comfortable. It wasn't just a house anymore, it was mine, filled with my things, my decisions, my life. Every corner I looked at was a reflection of me. And for the first time in a long time, I liked what I saw. Work had been steady. I had settled into a rhythm that allowed me to focus on my personal growth. I spent more time at the gym, pushing myself physically in ways I hadn't before. It wasn't about impressing anyone, least of all, Sariah. It was about proving something to myself. The changes were subtle at first. A little extra muscle, a more confident stride. But as the months went on, I could see the difference. I was stronger not just in body, but in mind. I felt more alive than I had in years. Jessica had been a quiet presence in my life during all of this. She hadn't pushed me to talk more than I was ready to, but she had been there when I needed her. We didn't rush anything between us, but there was an understanding between us that made everything feel natural. I didn't expect it to turn into something more, and I wasn't looking for it. But when it happened, it didn't feel like a sudden leap into the unknown. It felt like an easy step forward. A continuation of what I had already started. The new version of me. It was a Saturday afternoon, when I got the first text from Sariah in months. It wasn't unexpected, but it still felt like a punch to the gut. I had known this moment would come eventually, but I had hoped it wouldn't. It read simply, "I've been thinking a lot about everything. I just wanted to say I'm sorry for how things ended." I stared at the message for a moment. My first instinct was to ignore it, to delete it, and move on with my day. But something in me held on to it, and I found myself typing out a response. "It's been a long time, Sariah. I'm not sure there's anything left to say." She responded quickly. "I just thought you should know. I regret everything. I was wrong, Brad. I'm sorry." I set the phone down, feeling strangely detached from it all. The words didn't have the weight they once would have. There was no anger, no desire for closure. Just nothing. A distant part of me felt like I should say something more. Something to make this final. But I realized I didn't need to. The ending had already happened. This was just the last echo of something that had died long ago. It wasn't that I hadn't forgiven her. I had. But forgiveness wasn't about her. It was about me. About releasing myself from the weight of what she had done. And I had done that. The days passed, and Sariah's texts stopped. There were no more apologies, no more attempts to rekindle anything. I don't know what she expected from me. Maybe some form of regret. Some acknowledgement of what she had lost. But I didn't give it to her. There was nothing left for me to give. I found myself in a comfortable rhythm again. I focused on my work, my health, and the things that made me feel good. I wasn't perfect. I wasn't healed completely, but I was getting there. I had grown. I had learned how to stand on my own, How to take control of my life without relying on someone else to validate me. I wasn't sure what the future held. I wasn't looking for a big change. But I was open to whatever came. That was a new feeling for me. Accepting life as it came, without the need to force it into something it wasn't. A few weeks later, I ran into someone new. Her name was Lena, and she was someone I'd met at the gym a few weeks back. We had started talking here and there, and it turned into something more, a simple, easygoing connection. There were no expectations, no rush, just two people enjoying each other's company. I wasn't ready to dive into anything serious, but it felt good to feel something again. It wasn't the fairy tale ending I once imagined, but it was mine. It was real. And that was enough. One evening, a few months after everything had settled, I was sitting in the living room, Lena beside me on the couch. We were watching some movie, but my mind wasn't really on it. It was quiet, comfortable. For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. Then the doorbell rang. I hesitated for a second, wondering who could be at the door. When I opened it, there stood Greta, Sariah's sister. She looked different, worn down, tired. Older than I remembered. "Brad," she said quietly, her voice almost apologetic. "I need to talk to you." I frowned, not sure what she wanted. "What is it, Greta?" "I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I need your help," she said, her eyes brimming with something that wasn't anger, but desperation. "Sariah's made a mess of things. She's in trouble." I could feel the old frustrations rising, the old anger I had buried deep within. But I kept it together, stayed calm. "I'm sorry, but I don't think I can help you," I said, my voice firm. "She's the one who ruined everything." Greta looked down at the ground, her hands shaking slightly. I know. But I need help. I'm stuck." I felt nothing. No sympathy, no desire to fix anything. I had been down this road before, and it led to nowhere. "You made your choice when you sided with her," I said coldly. "I'm not helping." She stood there for a moment, the silence between us thick, before she turned and walked away. I closed the door behind her, feeling nothing more than the weight of finality. This was it. It was over. For both of us. For everyone who had played a part in that twisted chapter of my life. I went back to the couch, where Lena was still sitting, watching me closely. I smiled, the smile reaching my eyes this time. "This is my life now," I said, the peace I had worked so hard to find settling deep in my chest. And for the first time, I realized how far I had come. This was mine. This was the beginning of something real. And it felt better than anything I had ever known.